Hi, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
We are exceptionally glad today to be introducing you to Dr. Catherine Meeks. For those of you who've been around EFM for a while, you may recall that in the 2018 to 2019 academic year, we read her book, Living into God's Dream, as one of our interludes. Today, she joins us for a conversation about our first interlude book this year, Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited. But first, Dr. Meeks, would you please share with us a little bit about your background?
Yes, well, it's a delight to be with you today, and I'm really grateful to have this continued relationship with EFM and EFM participants. I grew up in Arkansas, the daughter of a sharecropper who was not able to read or write, and a school teacher who graduated from college when I was 18 years old after having gone to college all of my early life. So I think that one of the most important things that I could say about myself is that I have a legacy of knowing how to persevere and how to stick to things when it takes a long time. I learned from my mother to be patient and to allow your vision of where you're trying to go to help you get there, even if it seems like sometimes it's taken way too long. I cannot really imagine what it must have been like for my mother to go to college 18 years.
Wow.
And in 18 years after my graduating from high school, I had earned 3 degrees.
Mm.
And so, that's just a kind of a little snapshot of how different my life has been from my mother's life. And now I've gone on to be awarded 3 honorary degrees. So basically, I have 6 degrees in a lifetime, and my mother spent all that time getting 1 degree. So it leaves me this sense of, with a sense of responsibility and a sense of urgency about doing the best I can to leave the world better than I found it.
Thank you so much, and we're really happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
Jesus, Jesus and the Disinherited was first published in 1949, which is just a heartbeat after the end of World War II, and well before the events of the 1960s began to change America. And we all know, as students of history, that seeds of change germinate under the surface of society before they burst out into a certain flowering. But I wonder if we could just start with some of this conversation about the context in which Thurman was writing, both theologically and culturally.
Well, it's really important to think about this. There's a story that Dr. Thurman tells about raking leaves at this white person's home and having their daughter scatter the leaves, and he told her to stop, and she kept doing it, and he said, I'm going to tell your father, and she didn't pay any attention to him. And then, I mean, your mother, and she didn't pay any attention to him. And then he said to her, I'm going to tell your father. And she got really aggravated and took the pen out of her pinafore and stuck it in his hand. And he jerked his hand back and said to her, oh, what's the matter with you? Have you lost your mind? And she said to him, what's the matter with you? You can't feel. So he grew up in this environment of where the formerly enslaved and the descendants of the formerly enslaved were considered to not be human, to not be able to feel. I mean, to have that child say that someone had taught her that. She didn't just think that up by herself. So this is the environment that Howard Thurman grew up in. And he says he had to realize that he had to learn what was at his core, and then he had to protect it against everything that was around him. And I think it's out of that space that he grew to be the theologian that we now so love and revere. That sense of isolation. He talks about himself a lot in that the sense of being an isolated human being on the planet as a person making it through the world in a Black body. So culturally, there's the marginalization, the denigration, the invisibility that he's up against. And then theologically, as a youngster, he and a young adult, he got so in touch with the natural world and was so grounded in understanding the world in a universal kind of sense until it separated him some, I think, from just more traditional thinkers. So that was another piece of the contribution to his isolation. And people didn't understand him. Still, some people still don't understand him and still think of him in ways that aren't that favorable because they think of his mysticism. But for him, it wasn't so much mysticism as it was understanding the universality of life and the connection of all life, which was very important in a world. It's very important to have that sense in a world that has tried to erase you.
Hmm. Yeah, so in another one of our EFM texts, My Neighbor's Faith, that we read in year 4, there's a story written by a Jewish man about meeting Dr. Thurman when he was dean of the Marsh Chapel at Boston University. And the man was worried about preserving his faith by studying Christianity. And Thurman asks him, "Don't you trust the Ruach HaKodesh, or the Holy Spirit?" And I think that's to ask that question implies that he trusted the Holy Spirit. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about how you think his trust in the Holy Spirit is kind of woven throughout this book and throughout his writings.
Well, I think that, of course, that's a good thing to reflect on. But I also think it's really important to understand that it wasn't like this trust, this kind of deep sense of connection was kind of outside of himself or an intellectual position. It was something that had come to be real for him at the depths of his soul. You know, it's like when somebody asked Carl Jung if he believed in God, and he said, "No, I know God. I know that God exists." So for Thurman, it's not an extraneous thing. There was his soul had borne witness to the truth of this energy system that keeps showing up and keeps showing up in all these ways and keeps bringing you into community with all of life. So when he begins to write, he's not writing some theological, theoretical principle. He's writing out of a sense of deep groundedness to a truth, you know, and it's like he discovered, you discovered the truth and then you go to tell somebody about it. It's not like you were out here searching around and you came across it and now you're reporting on it. That's not what he was doing. He was reporting on what he had already discovered. So it's like true for him now, no matter what else happens out here, because he's got witness from his own soul, his own heart, to this matter of the Holy Spirit and the power of the Spirit and the Spirit's undying devotion to helping you be on the track you need to be on.
You know, one of the big themes in the book has to do with fear and violence. And Thurman says deception is perhaps the oldest of the techniques by which the weak have protected themselves against the strong. Through the ages, at all stages of sentient activity, the weak have survived by fooling the strong. And I think of a favorite prose poem that I loved when I was younger by Michelle Clift called "Claiming an Identity They Taught Me to Despise." And for a young gay person in the 70s and the 80s, the navigation about how much to be out and to whom and when was a constant preoccupation. And it entailed deception, or what I used to think of as deflection. And my intention at all times was to keep physically safe. And, you know, Cliff, of course, was navigating intersectionality, a term that didn't exist then. But it really took a toll on my integrity and my soul. And Thurman says a profound piece of surgery has to take place in the very psyche of the disinherited before the great claim of the religion of Jesus can be presented. What does he mean by that? And I wonder about your thoughts on deception and what Thurman is getting at here.
Well, it's really quite a complicated set of notions here. The first thing is, I think, that notion of mask wearing is that there's a lovely Paul Laurence Dunbar, I believe, poem about "We Wear the Mask," talking about formerly enslaved people. It's also what Du Bois talks about with double consciousness, that you live in this world where you got to present yourself one way, and it's the way you present yourself is not the way you really are. The claim of Jesus Christ that Jesus will set you free and allow you to be who you were put on the earth to be is, it's kind of it's a paradox, actually. The effort to try to be free in a world that doesn't want you to even be. How do you do that without getting yourself into a real pickle? And I think that's where the deception piece comes. It's in a way, it's I like to think about it as being subversive. Mm. That people of faith, who have been oppressed or who are oppressed, have to be subversive. You're always kind of operating on an overt level and a covert level. And you overtly, the trick is not to get so far covertly away from what's true inside. Because if you get too far out with the deception, you become a person who's not really a whole person. But as long as you can realize that, you know what you're doing, you know who you really are, you know what's at your core, which goes back to what Thurman said about making sure that he knew his core and that he stayed grounded in that space, and he didn't let the stuff external to him become a definer of what was internal. So the only way to live without going crazy is to begin to know what you're doing, first of all, and to figure out why you're doing it, and to figure out how much of it you can do and have your soul stay intact. And I think that that's where people get into grave trouble, because they haven't thought that all through. So you just go out trying to be acceptable in a world that is not interested in you. And then if you don't watch it, you become a person who is manipulative and a person who is not sure yourself who you are, which is kind of dangerous for you and people around you. So, this is, for me, the dilemma of life is becoming clear about who you are and how you're going to stand in the world, and what price are you willing to pay for the world's acceptance of you. I think that's, so, and everybody has to make that decision for themselves. And you get to a point where if you go too far, it's a detrimental thing. But if you don't go far enough, it can also be detrimental. You could end up just shooting yourself in the foot, like in your job or somewhere, because you just can't manage to know that you don't have to tell everybody everything about yourself every time you open your mouth, which becomes then kind of like, deception, but it's very it's very precise deception. You know exactly what you're doing. The old Black people have a saying that when white folks ask you where you're going, you tell them where you've been. And when they ask you where you've been, you tell them where you're going. You're talking all the time and they're getting no information. And you're not even lying, because you said, where are you going, and you talk about where you've been in some kind of way that, they don't quite catch on. And then when vice versa. So you become very kind of shrewd at managing the truth, and yet managing not to be so revelatory that it becomes destructive. And that's really a dance, and it's a funny dance, and it's a dance that most people don't do very well with. And it's a part of the work, I think, of all of us that are trying to help people work toward the project of being well. How do you do this without so that you really are a well person.
Yeah.
You know, you're not so twisted inside yourself that you can't function. You still need to be able to have a life where you can function, where you can live at peace. But it takes a lot of work. I think it actually takes a lifetime to get that rhythm worked out.
So speaking of work to do, I'm feeling in our current society often like my back is against the wall, but I'm also very conscious of the fact that I can slip away from the wall in ways that others can't.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I want to figure out how to navigate that tension between feeling both uh, backed up against something, but also able to walk away when I feel like, in a way that others can't. And I know in your book, um, the night is long, but light comes in the morning. You talk about all the things we need to do, the processes that we need to go through in order to get to reconciliation. And I feel like it's that tension that I'm dealing with of how do I get to a reconciled state where I can be in community and be an ally in community to people who don't feel like they have an option of getting off the wall. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit for our mentors, because maybe a lot of our mentors are feeling that same tension.
Hmm. Well, so I want to start by saying that thank you for referencing my book on racial healing and racial healing meditations. I don't think that what we're working toward is reconciliation. I think what we're working toward is healing, and I think when we get to places of being healed, that it becomes clearer to us how to do what we need to do. You know, I just was in a meeting last night with folks talking about post-election resilience, and it occurred to me how much people want you to tell them a formula. Give me a formula so I know what to do. But there is no formula and there is no magic. So the thing is that the more we interrogate ourselves, the clearer we become about who we are and what we want to be in the world and who we want to be in the world, the more clear it becomes what we're to do. And for white people particularly, wanting to walk alongside uh, people of color, whether be they uh, brown or black, it's really important to understand how we feel about whether we can trust you, you know, because you can go take a break when you want to. We can't take a break because we take ourselves with us. So wherever we go, that people know who we are. They whatever black or brown stirs up for them, that's what happens. You know, if you're a white person, you can say, "Well, I'll be back later." Or this is as far as I'm going. And so that's why I have that meditation about looking for more than an ally, because we're looking for people who will be pilgrims with us. And you can't be a pilgrim if you haven't done your work. You cannot. I mean, it just doesn't work. Because pilgrimaging requires you to be with people where they are, where you find them, and to bear their pain readily and voluntarily. And so that's why there's so much shifting. You know, people start out on going to help with a big movement, and then where's everybody? Like, where's everybody now talking about police killings? Where were, you know, 4 years ago when George Floyd was murdered, everybody was out there. Now, but where's everybody? I mean, we're still killing people. The police still killing people. So how do you, with a, you know, first of all, Thurman talks about Jesus being a person with his back against the wall, with the Roman overlords and all of the structure that made him a marginalized person. That is not the Jesus that most people have any interest in.
Yeah.
But, you know, we want the Jesus that's going to be Christ the King, which I can't stand that image because it's not, Jesus never presented himself as going to be Christ the King. But how do we embark upon the journey that requires that energy of allowing ourselves to be dependent upon something bigger than ourselves readily in the 21st century when we've got so many resources, and particularly if you've got white skin, because you think your white skin assures you a different way to have to be. And I think that's a part of what's happening right now in the disruption in the country. White people are far more distressed about what's going on than Black people, because we've seen this show before and we've seen worse shows. And so, but it's destabilizing when you expected it to be this way because it's supposed to be, and then it's not. So your back is not against the wall the same way a person's back is against the wall who has no place.
So
And you can go rest.
Dr. Meeks, so I'm wondering if the questions we need to be asking ourselves when do we find ourselves in the position of the Romans?
That's right. That's right. Yes, that's right. And if you can take a break from the whole mess, then your back is not against the wall.
Yeah.
Your back is against the wall when there's nowhere to go. And Jesus's back was against the wall, and he ended up on a cross. And that's why we don't want to be talking about that. We want to be talking about Christ the King. So, but for me, the Jesus with his back against the wall is far more important, because that's where I live. And my family and friends and people of color, that's where we live, with our backs against the wall in many, many instances. And we're looking for people, white, Black, brown, green, whoever, who are willing to be stand in that space with us. Maybe you can't fix anything, but you're willing for your back to be against the wall too. Truly willing. And that to me is the difference between an ally and a pilgrim, a fellow pilgrim. That you're willing to say, hey, those shoes look like they're really heavy. Let me wear them for a while.
So Dr. Meeks, when we were preparing for this video today, you mentioned that you actually happened to meet Dr. Thurman several times. And I'm just wondering, it also seems as though there's been something of a resurgence of his work. We see his poetry on Facebook. And so I'm wondering about how your thoughts about how his legacy lives on today. He feels so contemporary. He feels so fresh and of this time in our sort of life. And so
yes. Well, so I met Dr. Thurman the first time when I was in bad shape and needing help and didn't know he existed. And I found him in the library in Macon, Georgia, which was one of the best things the Holy Spirit ever did for me, was leading me to him. And he became such a source of light and joy for me. And I wrote to him, and because he lived in San Francisco, and he was coming to preach at Spelman College's baccalaureate that spring, which was so serendipitous. And I went to hear him preach and then got a chance to spend some time talking to him. And then I went to San Francisco to visit with him, and visited with him two times after I met him before he passed away. So I will never forget the joy of that. It was a tremendous gift. I think that the kinds of truth that Thurman discovered and talked about, and it wasn't like he made the truths up. They were there. He just illuminated them. And his way of embodying that truth, I think that it's such a universal fact until we were bound to come back to him. It wasn't any way that he was going to be erased, because he was talking about universals. And I think we need to really spend more time dealing with what are the universals that connect us. And I think folks are really wanting to know how to live on the planet and how to connect to the other and to these energies that keep on, working on destruction. If we don't get it together, we're going to destroy the planet. And there are many of us who know that. So I think that it's that hunger. He talks a lot about the hunger of the heart in one of his, in several places, but the hunger for this heart connection that actually allows people to feel at home. And his understanding, I can hear him as I'm talking saying, until you can find somewhere to be at home, you cannot be at home anywhere. And then to also say that the only real place you can find real true refuge is in another person's heart. So those are facts of universal truths that are very that cross culture, gender, and class, and all of the ways we have set up to separate ourselves from each other. And I think that one of his, maybe the best gift he gave to us is this idea of looking at things in a universal sense. Because he felt the connection to animals, to all of life, to all of life. And that I think that sense of connecting to all of life is something that we so desperately need now, and it's helping us to go back looking. We're looking for where can we find answers, and he just is sitting there saying, "I've been here waiting."
Mm-hmm.
Glad to see you come back, because I'm sure if he has any consciousness about it, because he knew that he was on the right track all the time. And he stayed on it his whole life. He did not veer off of it in terms of, deciding to go be an activist or quit being a contemplative and writing and saying what he was saying. And he just invites us and gives us permission to look at that part of our lives. And I'm just so thankful to see him being rediscovered and the resurgence of his words and his work in seminaries. And I'm just really heartened by the numbers of people who know him when I'm off speaking and I ask if folks know Dr. Thurman, and the hands that go up just make me feel so good, because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, these folks are getting on a good track here.
Hopefully some of them are EfMers, because this is the second or third time we're reading Dr. Thurman's book.
Great. Yes, I'm sure they are. I don't get to always do too much interrogating audiences, but whenever I hardly ever make a talk where I don't talk about Dr. Thurman. So he's just part of my consciousness on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to shift a little bit right now and remind our community that in addition to a curriculum revision, we're also putting together these short courses called Reflections. And Dr. Meeks, you are going to be one of the first offerings we have. And I wondered if you could give people a little sneak peek of what's going to be launched next year from you.
Well, I'm working on turning my The Night is Long, but a Light Comes in the Morning racial healing meditations book into a course. And of course, it won't be the same as the book, but it will resonate, of course, with those ideas there, and give people an opportunity to engage those ideas and some of the energies that we've got to confront in a different kind of setting, in terms of being able to be in a conversation with people. While I think that the book is wonderful, I really like the book and I'm pleased about it, but I think to talk with people about some of these things and to be able to, I'm hoping to be able to have exercises and little provocative thought pieces that will help people to kind of dig deeper into themselves, to start seeing where their own issues are arising. Because if we don't have the conversations with ourselves that get at the wounding, then healing isn't going to happen. And so I'm hoping the course will be complementary to the book. And there's an audio book now of that book, and it'll be out in paperback as well in January. So I'm hoping, because my goal is always to be trying to create a conversation that leads to healing, So I'm hoping that the combination of the book and the audio book and the paperback book and the EFM course, that all that out there in the universe is going to just generate different kinds of ways for people to engage one another, not just around my book or what I'm writing, but around the whole issue of racial woundedness and how do we move toward healing.
Dr. Meeks, thank you so much for being with us, and we really look forward to posting this video for our mentors. Mentors, this video will cover weeks 14 and 15 for the interlude reading this year. Please let us know how this conversation helped you design your seminar sessions, and let us know how your discussions go. Thanks again so much. Beth and I will see you next week.
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Meeks, for joining us.
You are so welcome. This is so much fun to get to talk about Dr. Thurman anytime. And I'm leading a 4-hour retreat on him tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to it's sort of like priming me for the time tomorrow, even though I'm always thinking about him, as I said, but this is delightful and it's good to talk to you all.
Thank you.
Take care.